All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Alyssa Dole. I'm a member of the MBA Tour. Thank you so much for tuning in to this webinar on 8 ways to set yourself up for application success. We're going to be joined by Scott Edinburgh, who is the founder and CEO of Personal MBA Coach. And he has been traveling with the MBA Tour for quite some time now. He comes and presents on our tours, and some of you may remember him from our North American tour, where he talked about application pitfalls. So without further ado, I will pass it off to him and he will begin.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Alyssa, really appreciate that. And thank you everyone for dialing in today. Give me 1 second. Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Well, yes, thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate you coming in tonight. One thing to mention is we'll have this be a pretty casual session. So if you have questions at any time, there's a little feature on the right where you can actually type in questions. Feel free to type in questions. I believe that you're all muted during the presentation, but best thing to do if you have questions, type in questions and we'll answer them as we go. And if anyone has any technical challenges, if you don't see the slides, if you don't hear me, you won't be able to hear this. But if you stop hearing me at all, just feel free to send a question through the form, or you can email me, scott@personalmbacoach.com, and say, hey, we can't see you, or something like that. So great. So as Alyssa mentioned, we'll be talking about ways to set yourself up for application success today. A little bit of background about myself. I went to MIT for undergrad, where I studied economics and business at Sloan. Did a couple years at Sloan's undergrad business program. And then I began my career at Deloitte, working in consulting, strategy and operations in Boston. And then I went to Wharton for my MBA. I had previously taken a couple summers of economics classes when I was in high school, really liked the Wharton curriculum, and went back for the MBA to study real estate and strategy. At Wharton is actually when I founded Personal MBA Coach, and I'll tell you more about the company in a bit. And to date, have over 11 years of admissions consulting experience and 96% success rate. A bit more about Personal MBA Coach. This is actually a picture of a recent event in San Francisco, in case any of you were at that event. We provide comprehensive tutoring and admissions consultancy. So basically help applicants through every step of the application process, from personal story development, brainstorming sessions. We do early MBA planning. I'll go over the whole process a little bit later towards the end. I am on the board of directors for AGAC, which is the Association of International Graduate Admissions Consultants. And that's a group that works pretty closely with admissions directors. One of the things we do each summer is sit in a room with admissions directors, and I run a session where we're evaluating a pile of fake applications and determining who's getting accepted, waitlisted, rejected, and why. A little bit of a behind the scenes process. And as a company, we have a team of former M7 MBA interviewers to help with the interview prep process. And again, we'll go over everything that we do in a bit towards the end. So moving along, how can you get started today? Okay, so we'll go over a number of different things that you can do. First is stepping up at work. It's a good idea to think about things that you can be doing to improve your profile from the professional standpoint. Maybe this is volunteering for roles or projects that allow you to fill in a skill or maybe an experience gap. Perhaps you're analytical skills are not so strong, or you think you might have a low quant score on the GMAT, now might be a good time to start to do some extra projects, maybe do some analytical work, start doing some modeling at work, something that perhaps a recommender could talk about. Also, it's always nice to think about some internal things at work. I know when I was working at Deloitte, we had a lot of internal firm initiatives. So we did recruiting and various white paper development, things like that. Think about what you can do to maybe lead an internal office group or some kind of event. And also, I'm sure a lot of you are doing this already, but you could mentor a colleague or volunteer to help with recruiting. So just little things that you can do here and there at work. I see a question. I'll just answer this now. So with only 2 years of work experience, am I a weaker applicant than others who have maybe 4 years of work experience? Great question. And for those of you on the line, you might be in a similar situation. So if you have 2 years of work experience today, then by the time you apply, assuming you're applying in the fall to start next fall, you probably have 3 years or maybe 3.5 years. On average, applicants do have 5 years, or students have 5 years of experience by the time they matriculate. I would say that overall 2 years does make it a little bit harder to get in than 4 years. That said, we have many clients that go young. I actually met a client at the MBA tour in New York last summer. She had 1 year of experience, was working in finance, and decided to apply anyway, really wanted to go to school, stay in New York. And she'll be going to school in New York next year, and we'll start with 2 years of experience. Part of the evaluation depends on how rich that experience is and what type of leadership roles you have. One thing that I'll mention is if you are an applicant with a little bit less experience than average, the bar is a bit higher in terms of the stats. So they would want to see a high GMAT score, let's say, and ideally a little bit of a higher GPA, just to sort of offset that. Very good question. So next is beefing up your extracurricular profile. A lot of clients come to me and say, actually just had a call tonight where someone said, look, I have everything ready to go, but I'm working long hours, and unfortunately, I'm not doing a whole lot outside of work, let's say. And so it's a good idea now to try to find these opportunities so that you can give back to the community, make a difference, beef up this extracurricular profile. Now, I usually see people on two ends of the spectrum, and obviously those in the middle. One end of the spectrum is the person who really doesn't have anything going on. Frankly, just isn't doing much outside of work, comes to me and says, look, Scott, how do we create this profile? What are some things that we can do to brainstorm to come up with something that I can do? And we go through our whole process. And then there's someone that has a lot of things. I had a couple clients this year who had more than 7 different activities, and I said, look, it's a little bit exhausting. I don't know how to make sense of all this, so let's try to actually focus here. Think about quality over quantity here. Applicants don't get in based on the number of things that they do, more so the impact that you have in the organization and in the community. One thing to think about is make sure that these activities really sort of match and gel with your profile. So if you have a particular personal story, you overcame something, or someone in your family overcame something, etc., and you can do something that speaks to that, it makes a lot more sense than just joining the National Association of Associations to be a junior associate member, something like that. Again, like less is more often in this case, and make sure that you really have time to make an impact in this organization. So the earlier you get started on something, the better. Next is find a mentor. This is something that's not really spoken about in a great level of detail, let's say, but a mentor can really support you, and potentially can eventually be a letter of recommendation writer at some point. Find someone who either has an MBA or is otherwise senior in his or her career to guide you through some of the key decision-making steps. A lot of our clients actually have mentors, and mentors don't help you with essay editing and letters of rec and interview prep with former interviewers. Those are things that maybe an admissions consultant might do, but a mentor can really help to guide you through some key decisions to make at work, especially if someone who knows you personally can think about your background and what things you might be able to do to improve yourself really outside of just the main MBA application process. It's also a good idea to start without assuming anything. Sometimes I find clients and applicants that find a mentor in a current student, and they reach out to MIT, say they're applying to Sloan, and they reach out to a Sloan MBA student to ask some information about the program and find out more about their background. Eventually, if they play their cards right, in a year or two, they might be someone that ends up writing a letter of recommendation on their behalf, or if nothing else, can really help them to think through and make some decisions. Make sure that you take the time to find the right fit and don't force a relationship. One thing I'll mention about finding a mentor, you don't need a mentor. So some people say, oh, if I don't have a mentor, what do I do? You don't need this. This is just one thing that you can do if you're not really sure if an MBA is right for you. Now, one way that we sort of replicate this is we have our early MBA planning packages, which basically allow myself and my team to guide you through the process to think about what are all the key things that you want to be doing to perfect your profile between now and when you apply. Certain activities at work, certain extracurricular roles, we really build that whole story. In lieu of that, this is what a mentor might do to help. So next, attend an MBA tour event, right? So we're here with the MBA tour talking. These events are really, really good. And there's another set of events that will be coming in the summer. These are great opportunities to show interest in the school. Showing interest in schools is important, especially for schools that I call them are more touchy-feely. They want to know that you're investing in the school, that you're taking the time to do the proper research and engaging with them. When you're at these events, make sure to do your homework. There's one most important thing that I can recommend before going to these, and this comes from experience speaking at, I don't remember how many, but a lot of these over the years. Do your research so that you can ask smart questions. So here we say unique and intelligent questions. What that means is don't go up to school X and say, so how many students do you send to investment banking or to entertainment or nonprofits? There are career reports for all these schools, so that would not be a great question. Better questions to ask are things that show you've really done your homework and you've researched the school and you want to know something specific. So I was talking with XYZ student at the Net Impact conference last fall, and I learned about this opportunity. How did that first come about, and what are some ways that future students like myself can get involved in that process? Something like that shows me, okay, this person has really done their research and they know what they're asking about versus more of a cookie cutter question. This is sort of obvious, but say it anyway. Don't say anything that's not positive. Right? So it's not great to go up to a school's table and say, oh, I heard it's very competitive here. Like, what are things that the school is doing to combat that? Just try to stay positive at these events. And obviously avoid questions that you can easily find the answers to online. And so that does require a lot of research to see what is online and what's not. And treat every encounter like it's an interview. This includes admissions committee members. This includes students that you talk to, even a receptionist that might pick up the phone as you call. So really anyone as part of the school, could be somewhat evaluative. So treat all these carefully, and this definitely includes these events. Give me a second, I see a question. Okay, so just got a question. Does it matter if I work in a top tier firm like Amazon or Google, as opposed to a small scale company with employees, given I'm still making an impact? Great question. So the short answer here is it does matter to some extent, but that doesn't mean that people from small companies don't get in. The main advantage of working at a large company is some of these large companies are more feeder companies to top MBA programs. There's a history of sending a certain number of people per year, not that there are quotas, but there's more comfort, there's more familiarity. it's easier for me to say, if you come from a big company that as an admissions director, I've evaluated applicants who come from them over a number of years, it's easier for me to say, okay, now I know how strong you are, or maybe, how weak you are, let's say. If you come from a smaller company, the benefit of that is you can really show a lot of performance and success. And generally, I find clients of ours that come from smaller companies, and to be clear, a lot of our clients, probably almost half of them, come from smaller companies, they're able to do a little bit more, whereas the employee at the larger company might be a little bit more sort of boxed into to their role. So it's definitely still great to come from a smaller company, but the onus is on you and your recommender to really clearly articulate the impact that you've had. Okay, so next, take time for self-reflection. The reason for this is it's a long process, right? Applying to school takes a long time. It's really important to think through things and determine what your personal story is, what makes you unique. The first thing you can do is just think about your motivations, your passions, what's important to you. The first thing that we do with all of our clients as we're working through an engagement is have them fill out this initial information form. It asks about passions and hobbies, struggles, challenges, and we get on the phone for at least an hour where we're talking about the profile and the interest. The goal of that is to come out of that conversation with a very clear sense of what is important to highlight for the schools and what's not important. And so, think about how you are unique from peers. What are things that you've done outside of work that might be interesting? Consider certain circumstances and choices that, drive your character, that sort of shape some of the things that you've done. Now, this could be positive or negative. Some people come to me and say, well, Scott, I haven't overcome a certain, really negative thing in life, and I haven't cured cancer. And, that's okay. You might need to sort of dig deep. That said, if you have something major in your life that you have faced, and perhaps it did, shape you to some extent, then that is something that you certainly want to think about. That might become part of your story. Get an early start on GMAT Prep. I think I fielded 3 questions this week from people that all centered around how early to start studying for the test. It's never too early. We have clients that took the test senior year of college. The test lasts 5 years, so it's never too early to start, studying. And one thing to think about is most of these skills you've already mastered to some extent in your background, and maybe you're just touching up on some things here or there. If you haven't, say you haven't started doing anything at all, maybe just start by taking a practice test. That will allow you to have a sense for, one, how much work you think you need. Do you need tutoring? So for instance, we offer private one-on-one tutoring. We have in-house software that we use to guide through the tutoring sessions, and we have 5 tutors on our team, most of whom have 790 on the GMAT, 4.0 GPAs from top Ivy League schools. We have a very individualized approach for tutoring. Is that something that you need, or self-studying going to get you there? Think about how you best learn and get help accordingly. There's self-studying, there are larger classes, and there's private tutoring. And next, think about, develop, and then stick to a plan. That's very hard. I did not stick to a plan. I was in London for work for a few months while I was studying for the GMAT and writing essays. Not a good combination. Best to get one of those done first. But come up with a plan and stick to it. One good suggestion is to register for the exam. By registering for the exam, you're forced to pay some money, and that sort of gives you a little bit of an incentive to keep studying. Now, some people say, how often, or rather, how long do we need to study for? I find that anywhere from 2 to 4 months is a good range of studying. If you're doing private tutoring, it's probably closer to 2 months. If you're doing self-study, it could be closer to 4 months. The shortest that I've heard a client study was 10 days, and that person got above a 750, but that's really rare. And the longest I've seen is 1.5 years. So there's a wide range based on your background and your ability, but overall 2 to 4 months is good. So let's say you are applying this fall to submit applications in September. Now's a great time to get started studying. I like to have clients take the test by, call it around May, late April, early May, mid-May, and that way we can spend the rest of May and June and early July with essay writing. For those of you who joined, I know some are joining and some are leaving. So again, my name is Scott Edinburgh, founder of Personal MBA Coach, and we're talking about things that you can do now to get prepared. If you have any questions, if there are things that you're curious about, topic that we're not covering, feel free to click on the little questions section in this platform, and you can just type in the question. We've answered a couple questions so far, and happy to answer any other questions that anyone has. Okay, just let's see. If you decide to cancel your GMAT score, whether it be within 2 minutes after the test or within 72-hour window, will it still be considered as a second time taking the GMAT the next time you decide to take it? Would schools know that you've canceled your score previously? So this is a great question. If you cancel a score, the score is wiped. So no schools will see the score. And you don't have to report it as a time that you took the test and received a score. The full score isn't actually given to you. They don't score the writing section until later on. Now, there are some schools that still ask you the total number of times that you've taken the test. And for those schools, and only some schools ask, you could and probably should include the canceled time, but you don't have to show the score. And I can tell you that you're not really evaluated on scores that you don't report. A lot of people are taking the test, they're retaking the test. Average scores are rising, so it's certainly fine to be retaking it. Now, if you're taking it so many times, and every time you take it, the score's not increasing, at some point you should probably pause and say, is this the best investment of time for you? But otherwise, canceling and retaking is totally fine. Okay, do I think a 750 is a good enough score for a top school, or would you recommend that I take it again? Yes, so great question. I ask you to send me your resume after the session to scott@personalmbacoach.com, and I can give you very, very specific answer. Without knowing a lot about your background, it's hard to say whether one score would be good enough for you or not, but 750 is a great score. So it's not that common for me to tell applicants to retake once they have a 750. I do have some people that are looking to retake it. Actually had a client sign up for tutoring with us. He has a 750 and he wants to increase to 780, but it's not that common. So usually 750 is a pretty strong score. That said, I would want to see the whole background and also what schools you're applying to. Next, how does one determine, great questions everyone, how does one determine whether the GMAT or GRE is best for them? Really good question. The GMAT was originally designed for business schools, and so that is the test that schools are most familiar with. The other thing about the GMAT is it allows applicants to showcase the analytical abilities better. The quant is a little bit harder on the GMAT than the GRE, and so if you want to show the best of your abilities, I usually do to take the GMAT. If quant is a real weakness of yours and somehow you're taking the test a lot of times and you're not really able to be improving the score, you might want to switch over to the GRE. Generally, I have folks start with the GMAT. Okay, how does the strategy for applying to schools differ between round 1 and 2? Also, really, really good question. I'll answer this in 2 different ways, and feel free to retype if there's a slightly different question that you were looking for. So I say round 1 is better than round 2, basically for everywhere. So if we're talking now and you're thinking of applying in the fall, then you should be applying in round 1, unless you haven't taken the GMAT and it just gets too late. In terms of the strategy differing, the strategy is similar. The only difference comes whether you're prepared or not. Honestly, from a timing standpoint, if you apply in round 1, you will probably get the results, assuming you get some interview invites, in mid-December. And by then, it's sort of too late to add round 2 schools. So you kind of have to think up front what you want to apply to in both of the rounds. And round 1 has fewer people and they tend to be more prepared. The quality is a little bit higher. So I say that it's better because fewer people are applying. Plus the classes are empty. No one has sort of filled the seats at this point. If you apply in round 2, some of the seats might be full. It might be a bit harder for some places to get in. That said, we help applicants with round 1 and round 2, and people get in most places. The only school that's a huge difference historically has been MIT. MIT is much better round 1 than round 2. Otherwise, I say there's probably about a 5% difference between round 1 and round 2. So while round 1 is better, it's not a huge difference, and we get a lot of applicants in both of the rounds. If you're thinking now and it's February, may as well do round 1 then. Okay, I'll keep going here and I'll keep answering questions as we go. So next, number 7, visit campuses. Okay, plan your campus visits. One thing to mention is you do not need to visit everywhere. So while we have a slide on visiting campuses, part of this comes as if the campuses are close to you, right? So if you're nearby, if you're in Boston or New York and you're applying to a school in Boston or New York, you should visit. If you live on the East Coast and you're applying to a school on the West Coast or vice versa, you do not need to fly across the country to visit if you don't want to. But visiting a school is good because it shows you a lot about the program. It allows you to learn quite a bit. You can meet students. You can begin to network and have some nice conversations with them. And the other thing is it shows some of the schools that you're interested, right? Some schools want to see that you didn't just apply to their school because they're ranked in the top X number of schools, but that you really took initiative and wanted to learn about the program and talk to students. If you do visit, try to visit by early April if you want to apply in round 1 of this year. Now, obviously, if you're applying in a future year, you have plenty of time, but one of the mistakes that I see applicants make every year is they don't plan their visits ahead of time. By the time May rolls around, some of these schools will stop doing their official class visits. And if you are going to visit a program, it's really good to sit in on a class to get the full immersive experience. Over the summer, you're not going to be sitting in on classes for the most part. Some programs, you might get a summer session here or there, but you won't get the full, the full sort of environment feel. Schedule meetings in advance, right? So don't just show up on campus and say, here I am. If you're interested in the energy club or, another club, email the president of the club and see if you can sit down for coffee or chat. Now, if you can't visit schools, for whatever reason you're not able to visit, you can't get time off work, or you don't have the funds or the ability to visit campuses, there are a lot of other things that you can do. Of course, going to the MBA tour is one of them. A lot of schools have online webinars. So they'll have information sessions, kind of like this one, where they'll tell you information about the school. They collect email addresses like we did. They'll see whether you signed up. You can reach out to contact students. A lot of these schools, most of the schools actually, have the ability for you to reach out to students and ask questions. If you Google contact a student XYZ school, you'll see how they have you contact them. Many schools will list students and they'll list their background information so that you can scroll through a page and see who feels most comfortable to talk to, and maybe someone who has a similar profile or a different profile, send them an email and ask for a chat. Some advice on these conversations is it's good to keep them brief. People are really busy, so you never want to have, more than like a 15-minute, requirement for a chat. Obviously, if people keep talking and they're really interested in the conversation, you can keep it going, but keep them brief. And also keep in mind that basically everything is evaluative. Unless you're talking with your admissions consultant or your friend, pretty much anyone else who's involved in the process, who's part of the school, could be sending something to an admissions director on your behalf. They're not necessarily always doing that, but it's definitely possible. So, keep your A game. So as you mentioned, in terms of the students, the other thing is more than students, you can reach out to alumni. Some people say, well, I can't contact too many students. I've talked to too many students from the clubs. Talk to alums. That's really important. And also think about other people in your network that you might not, realize have gone to the school. The first place to start is LinkedIn. It's great to go through. If you have a warm lead, it's much better than a cold lead. So LinkedIn is a great place to start if you're thinking about people to reach out to. So last year, our clients received over $4.5 million in scholarships. And this is just a sample of some of the schools that they receive scholarships from or going to. This year, we're at 3.7 so far. That number varies by student drastically. Some people are getting $20,000 and $30,000 working with us. Many people are receiving full rides. And people get scholarships really based on two criteria and then some other minor criteria. One is the GMAT score. So the higher the GMAT score, more likely you are to get money. And the other is the strength of the application. So we'll talk about how we can help in a minute. I'll answer some other questions. Okay. Should you take both practice exams to determine which you should go? That's definitely a fine strategy. And that's really a way to know where you're able to shine best. Okay, if I want to switch careers after the MBA, but don't have experience in the industry and function, would it strengthen my application if I sought out a job in my desired industry within the same year that I plan to apply? Yes, it would. It's really good to get some experience. It's funny, the first thing that we do, so we talked about tutoring earlier, in our brainstorming session where we're talking about key things about you that we want to highlight to the school. One of the things that we talk about is, are your goals in line? Doesn't make sense. I often have people that want to move from finance to fashion, let's say. Well, that's probably not a very common scenario, but it has happened where we move from finance to fashion. And we say, okay, so what have we done in the fashion space? What can we show them? Maybe we join an extracurricular club or otherwise get an internship or something like that. It is good to seek something out. Now, if you're totally changing jobs, I would make sure that the job that you're changing to is at least on par, if not better than what you're doing now in terms of role, title, responsibility, salary, etc. You don't want to take too much of a setback in the new industry. So I'll talk a little bit about how we can help and then keep jumping back and forth between this and answering questions. So, once we do story development, we go to school selection. We help you to think about what school should you target based on your profile, your personal goals, things that you want to do from a professional standpoint, fit, all these things come into play when we're advising you on school selection. We'll do resume work. Keep in touch with us. We have a whole new presentation that we'll be giving on resume editing and letters of recommendation. And that gets a lot more detailed than today. We'll do that a little bit later on. For resume, we're really looking to remove industry context, focus on higher level takeaways. Overall, we want to improve the quality of the resume, but also make sure that it makes sense for admissions directors and we're not getting too detailed. Last thing you want to do is talk about a resume that is so detailed that your friend doesn't even know what it means. And one of the tests I always say is show your resume to someone who's outside of the space, maybe someone who's not working in business at all, perhaps a physician or someone who's retired out of the workforce for quite some time. See if any of these people that are really just not that close to what you're doing are able to understand everything that you're saying. If they are, then you're probably on the right target, let's say. Then we work on essay content development, essay editing. So we'll do detailed edits to the essay. We'll send you sample essays and help you to think about how to structure your responses. We have graduate English professors on the team who teach creative writing. We're also a second set of eyes on the essays. We do mock interviews. We have a team of right now 12 former MBA interviewers that help with mock interviews. And the mock interviews are really different for each school. Some schools like Wharton and Michigan Ross do group mock interviews. And so we would put you on Google Hangout with 5 or 6 other clients applying to the school, and we simulate a group session, versus some schools have alumni that do the interviews, and they only look at your resume. So we would also have an alumni interview, a former alumni interviewer conduct the interview, having looked at your resume. We have a decision-making guide that you can download after the session or right now. It's personalmbacoach.com/decision sign up. And that allows you to think through some things, choosing the right MBA option. There's part-time, there's full-time, executive, 1-year MBA, 1.5-year MBA, a little bit of analysis through MBA rankings and school selection. If you have any questions at all, first of all, feel free to keep typing them here as you have been, or you can send me an email after the session at scott@personalmbacoach.com. I'm happy to set up time to talk with you further. So pulling some other questions, let's see. Okay, how much should rising tuition/cost factor in return on investment on an MBA? Very good question. You know, I would say that you want to think about return on investment carefully. Most schools publish the pre-MBA and post-MBA salaries of their students. And one thing to think about is nobody's average, right? So you see the average jump is X. You're probably getting either less or more than that. I would think about the ROI. One, obviously from a financial standpoint, are you going to be working at a job that's paying you more money after school, but also in terms of your own career advancement and enjoyment. We find that clients who go to business school and get an MBA are more fulfilled in their job, in addition to making more money. The other thing is you want to take a longer term approach. So in many of our clients, we'll get scholarships right away, and so that obviously impacts the ROI. But otherwise, you want to think about 10, 15, 20 years down the line. Your salary might not jump a very large amount right after you graduate from where you started, and we have clients who actually make less money after school than what they're making before school, but they want to take a leap and eventually lead a team and run a company down the line, and the MBA makes sense for them. So I know I didn't directly answer the question of rising tuition and the cost factor. I think what I would do is just project forward. So if you think about if tuition is rising 5% per year, and you're trying to think about what will it be next year and the year after, you might assume a similar rise. Do I have any advice for non-US citizens and scholarships? Does that factor in? So citizenship does not factor into merit-based fellowships. Fellowships are given based on the merit of the application. There are some that are awarded to certain groups, certain demographics, or certain backgrounds, but most of the money just goes to the best applications. And as I mentioned, our clients get a lot of money. The main advice, I mentioned this earlier, but in case you were joining lately, the main advice is to get a very high GMAT score and to write amazing essays. Those are the two things that lead to getting fellowships and scholarships. The other thing is also being realistic in terms of the school, right? So if you're looking at a school that has a high test score and yours is not that high, you might not be getting money from that school. Generally, a school will want to give some money if they feel like you're going to be a very valuable contributor to the classroom. But citizenship really doesn't impact things. We have a lot of, half of our clients are not from the US, and they get lots of scholarship dollars as well. Okay, what's the best way to ask for an LOR without upsetting your employer? Yeah, good question. So it depends on the company. Assuming this is an issue, since you're asking the question, first of all, let's think about timing. If you're applying this fall, well, if you're applying next year, it's obviously way too early. If you're applying in the fall, it's still a little bit too early. You can start to ask in, call it early May, mid-May timeframe. I like to have applicants talk with recommenders and come to a joint decision that they will be applying to school. And the first thing that you could do is just have a meeting with the recommender, talk about your progress, or say recommend, or have a meeting with your boss, I guess. Talk about progress, career, thank them for the guidance, talk through what you think you might want to do for yourself and perhaps your own future. You can talk about the company and how the company progresses and how you can keep progressing. And start with just a casual conversation, and then have another conversation later on, maybe in a month or two, and kind of lead them to the answer. It's always easier to ask someone for something if they feel like it's sort of their idea, right? So rather than saying, hey, ex-boss, I'm applying to school and I'd love a letter. Can you send it to me in 3 weeks? Start ahead of time, a few months before you need it, and talk through your career progress. Thank them for their guidance, and bring this up. Now, if that doesn't work, you might just have to come right out and say, look, thank you for everything. I am applying to X school, and I would be honored if you could write me a letter of recommendation. And if you have more specific questions, feel free to send me an email, and I'm happy to go over them. What are the chances of getting scholarship in an executive MBA? With about 8 years of experience in analytics and consulting, would executive be a more value add than a regular full-time MBA? So I'll answer the two questions separately. First, chance of scholarship in an executive MBA, I would say they're low. There's not as much money in executive MBA programs to give out for scholarships. So I would probably think about the EMBA in the context of paying for it yourself, and then any money is icing on top of the cake. It is a little bit different than full-time MBA programs that do tend to have larger budgets for scholarships. In terms of 8 years of experience, you're on the border, so you could certainly apply full-time if you wanted to. And I would want to look at your application, your resume to be sure, but we have applicants who have 8, 9, 10 years of experience in full-time programs, and often more. Would you get more out of the executive MBA? I think that you would be surrounded by more experienced professionals. And so you would probably learn from their background and experience a bit more than you would from the full-time program. The other main difference, of course, is the ROI equation. If you're working full-time, you don't have to take 2 years off of work to do it. So we have clients that go to executive MBA programs with as low as 5 or 6 years. Columbia takes applicants that are a little bit younger. Wharton takes some younger applicants. Then you have schools like MIT Sloan that have an average of 17 years of work experience in their executive MBA program. So for that program, you actually wouldn't qualify for. So there's some programs you can qualify for executive and some full-time. I would want to dive into your background a little bit more, but just from what I know so far, you could actually do either one. And executive MBA programs tend to be a little bit easier to get into as well. In terms of timing of changing jobs, from your perspective, would it be okay to switch jobs within 3 to 4 months of applying? Or does that seem impulsive? Very, very good question. So my preference is to have at least 6 months experience at a job before you hit submit. So 3 to 4 is a little bit low. Can you do it? Yes. Have we had applicants who have done it successfully? Absolutely. But without knowing anything else about your background and what the new job is, I would advise you to have a little bit more experience. So say if it's 3 to 4 months before round 1, maybe you apply in round 2, right? And you get a little bit more experience. This does depend on what the job is. So if you're moving from, call it a B+ job to an A+ job, it might be fine if you have only 3 months of experience because it's a much better job. So that definitely weighs into it. Also, it depends how many jobs you've had previously. So is this only your second job, or is this one of 4 jobs, and then are you looking like a jumper? I've had unemployment gaps. What's the best way to compensate for this? Well, first of all, the best thing to do if you have a gap in employment is to explain the reasoning for the gap in an optional essay. And if there's a good reason, then schools are often okay to overlook it. But you do want to explain. In terms of compensating for this, really the only things that you can do are just make everything else that much stronger. So we want to have really strong letters of recommendation. We want to have a high test score, strong essays. The other thing that you could do, say if you graduated from school 3 or 4 years ago, but you have like 6 or 7 months of a gap, maybe wait 1 more year before applying. to show that even though you have a gap, you have some decent consistency in work. Gaps do not keep you out of programs by any means, but you would want to explain why you had the gap and make sure that you still have enough months or years of experience outside of the gap. Generally, what don't applicants ask you about that they should before considering an MBA? Yeah, great question. So the most common thing, or at least what came to my mind first tonight, is location. A lot of people are thinking about going to the best program they can get into, which is great and often a very good strategy. But people don't always think about what companies are recruiting and how often are people moving from X city to Y city after school. There are some places that you can go to study in, and then you can go and work anywhere. But then if you're looking at something a bit more niche and you're in a market that's also niche but a different type of niche, it might be a little bit tricky to do some recruiting. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. Other things are, am I on the right career path? Some people are doing maybe a standard job path and the MBA makes sense for them, but then after talking to them and figuring things out, we realize that this might not be the right path for them. There might be something else that's a little bit better. And so thinking through and analyzing the career path is really important. The other thing, I'll say three. Lists are good in three. So the last thing that people don't usually ask that is good to ask is how are the schools changing in general? Some people want to maybe advance their careers in a certain way and aren't really looking at the new opportunities that are out there. Also, lastly, I guess I lied, we'll say four things. It doesn't have to be an MBA. So you can apply to other programs that are non-MBA. You can still sit down, you can still take the GMAT, you can still go to the MBA tour, you can still talk with us and work with us. But you can go to another specialized master's program, Master of Analytics, or Master of Finance, or many other programs that are popping up as well. Who would be the best recommenders? Does recommenders' position matter? Can I have my professors back in university be my recommender? So you don't want to ask anyone from university to be a recommender. They don't make great recommenders. Schools really want someone who works with you professionally. In terms of the position does not matter at all. And one of the talks that I give with the MBA tour, I have this picture of a certain CEO on the page, and I say, pitfall number 2 is don't ask your company CEO to write the rec letter, which is a little bit of a joke because you certainly could, but the title doesn't matter. What matters is how strong the letter is. That's the most important. The bar for these letters is extremely high. So you want someone who can write a really, really strong letter of recommendation. You also want the letter to be very specific so that it's not only strong, but it says exactly why you are better at what you're doing than your colleague. And you want that person to have worked with you somewhat recently. So if you have 4 or 5 years of work experience, let's not ask someone that you worked with during your first year of employment. Let's ask someone who can talk to your recent accomplishments. And then it's great to have someone who's timely, who's on target, etc. Now, say you have 2 people or 3 people, most schools want 2 letters. So you have 3 people and all of them do all these things. You talk and you say, Scott, look, all these 3 people can do everything. One of them is a little bit higher up in the company and thus has more experience. I'll probably want the person who has more experience, not just because of the prestige, but because they might be able to compare you to others a little bit better than someone who's a bit more junior. However, not at the expense of detail. So you don't want to ask someone who leads the whole company who might not be able to say a lot of specifics about what you do that's good. I'd rather ask maybe your direct manager who actually knows day in and day out what it is that you do. With the government making it difficult to obtain visas to come to the US, limiting the number of international candidates for grad programs, is this the time for US students to apply for best chances at top tier programs? Very, very astute question. So I will say that overall numbers are down for applicants. over the last couple of years. And so it is becoming a little bit easier to get into some top schools. That said, the numbers are not down drastically, and I don't think that there would be a huge difference. I think it is a good time to apply. If we think about what might happen with the economy, say if you're predicting the economy to go down, in a low economy or a poor economy, more people tend to apply. So it might get a little bit more competitive. However, your question specifically about international versus US candidates, it's not really applicable because if you're a US candidate, you're not really competing with someone from another country. Schools tend to like balanced classes and diverse classes, and so they don't have quotas at all, but you might not be competing with someone from another country. Maybe just someone else from that country would get in, instead of the person that isn't applying. So. Yes, thank you for coming as well. I just got to thank you. Okay, what about part-time MBA? Is it a good investment if not sponsored by the company? Great question. So personally, I love part-time MBA programs. I think you can do great things. I'll talk about this for a minute. The big difference between part-time and full-time, obviously, is you can work at the same time. So the return on investment equation is completely different. You are spending money for the MBA, but you're not losing money in salary. You can also take the learnings and bring them directly back to work and start to improve at work. Another thing that's good is part-time MBA programs tend to draw a more diverse crowd than full-time in terms of years of experience. So you heard a question earlier today, 8 years of experience, should I go for the executive instead of the full-time? So some people like that are already thinking, away from the full-time, whereas with part-time, you can work with people who have a little bit of experience, medium amount, and a lot of experience. The one thing I'll say for part-time MBA programs is that depending on the school, and this is very important, we'd have to talk separately because a lot of these schools handle recruiting differently. Depending on the school, the recruiting might not be as robust as a full-time, or it might be. One thing that you should keep in mind is that you want to really be aggressive if you're in a part-time program. One of my best friends went to NYU Stern part-time for her MBA, and she has a fantastic job now that a lot of my classmates from the full-time program at Wharton don't have. Did she get it directly from on-campus recruiting during the program? I don't believe so, but definitely we used the MBA to get there. And at the end of the day, you will write MBA on your resume. You won't necessarily write part-time. So I think for many people, a part-time MBA is a great investment. Next, I have had experience in 3 different companies in the span of 3 years. Does this come in negative light for my application? I would say that it depends what the experience is and what the companies are. Overall, my answer would be yes. That's not a very positive thing. It's probably a little bit negative. But I talked to somebody yesterday who had 7 different jobs over the span of 8 or 9 years. But you know what? Every job was a big jump. And so for this person, the escalation of their career path was phenomenal. And so for them, it was worth it. Now, if you're moving to similar level roles, I would probably recommend that you get some consistency and work experience before you apply. So this year might not be the best year for you to apply, so that you can give the schools the opportunity to, see how you do at work, maybe get promoted, perhaps get a raise. That might help you. Again, as I mentioned before, the best thing to do is to send me your resume so that I can fully evaluate, but that's, without knowing the details, that's what my answer would be. Okay, really great questions. Are there any programs that help you prepare for your MBA, or are you more or less on your own? So I think what this is asking is in terms of the academics preparing for the MBA. So as an admissions consultancy, we help applicants through the application. So we do resume editing, interview prep, story development. So we will help you through everything from now until you're in school. We also actually do tutoring for folks during the MBA. We do private tutoring as well. Other programs, there are many pre-MBA programs and classes that you can take. And if you send me an email, I'll send you a list. There are a lot of different boot camp style things. Part of this depends on what you need help in. Is it analytical skills? Is it quant? Is it presentation or public speaking? What are some things that you're not strong at? But there are definitely applicants that don't have the prerequisites for an MBA, and so they will take some courses. Plus, there are some schools that require things to study before the MBA. So yes, there are a lot of different programs that can prepare you rather. What if I don't know what I want to do post MBA? What is the best way to position myself during the application and interview process? So if you don't know what you want to do post MBA, then you are like 70% of our clients. Honestly, one of the things that I do is I present the results of this survey that we do of thousands of applicants each year to a team of admissions directors from most of the top schools. A couple years ago, we had a stat in there that I think it was 3 or 4 years ago that said 80 to 90% of people change their minds once they're in business school. So even once you're there, you'll probably do something different. If you don't know what you want to do, best thing to do is to start brainstorming. So when we work with folks, we think about what can you do that connects your current work experience to something in the future. I would like to say let's take something and make sure that it sort of matches across, so we're not maybe changing function and changing industry and changing country and changing company size. We want to have something that makes sense, but you want to think about what do you enjoy now with the job? What are some things that perhaps you would enjoy better? Do you like to work with clients? Do you not like to work with clients? It's quite a thorough process that we go through, but those are some of the first things that I would recommend. Okay, let's see. We might have time for a couple more questions. Does it give you a leg up if your letter is coming from an alumni of that program? Yes. Quick answer, yes. It definitely helps to get a letter from someone who is connected to the business school. But if that person doesn't know you very well from a professional standpoint, then you can certainly ask them to write a separate character reference. So just a more informal letter to the admissions team rather than a formal letter of recommendation. But yes, alums do make better letters. You just spoke about the experience of a recommender. On a similar note, do the credentials of your recommender matter? Very good questions. So if your recommender doesn't have an MBA but has great knowledge of your work, the credentials are not that important. I think as a tiebreaker, I would rather have someone who's an MBA graduate write a letter than someone who's not, but it really would only be a tiebreaker. Credentials aren't that important. What's important is what their experience is and how many other people they've managed and how they can compare you to others. But if you have someone who's really good, who can write a good letter and knows you and doesn't, have an MBA, that's okay. I wouldn't worry about that too much. Okay, so I think that was all of the questions, which is great timing. Thank you everyone for all the great questions. If anyone has anything else, feel free to post it now, but we're just about at the top of the hour. So thank you, Alyssa, for setting this up, and thank you everyone for coming. Again, any other thoughts or questions, feel free to jump on the website and read what we have to offer. Send an email, scott@personalmbacoach.com, and look forward to hearing from some of you soon.